Welcome back to WagerTalk.com. I'm Marco D'Angelo, joined with Preston the Sports Cheetah. This is part 2 of this week's Prepping for College Football. We're talking about returning starters. And Preston, as we touched upon in the first part of this segment, we said about the offense have changed so much in college football. And in the old days, you really wanted those teams that can control the football, control the clock, and that meant a lot of running the football. But now with the faster pace tempo and guys, not taking any, time off the clocks, the running game, where do you put the emphasis now today in today's game with college football and the running backs?
Yeah, it's a good question because in general they've kind of died off as far as being legitimate Heisman contenders. You're not going to see them winning as often because quarterbacks are throwing for more touchdowns and pass yards, and then you'll have star receivers that have just as good of seasons as some of the running backs. I haven't really made an adjustment as far as I guess what's the best way to explain this? If you have a good running game, when you do use it, then it's going to be good. Mm-hmm. If you have a bad running game, when you do use it, then it's going to be bad. So you kind of have, you account for teams that run a lot or pass a lot still because you know that ahead of time. So if it's a team that doesn't run much and they don't have a great running game, it's not a huge deal. If it's a team that normally runs the ball a lot and they don't have a good running back coming back, or it's a young group that's returning, then maybe I'll take note of that and lower their rating as far as the running back core goes. It's just really team to team and based on that. I think one thing though that I generally have done the last few years in regards to receivers, I think if you have an elite receiver, more and more they're making a bigger impact or a bigger difference game to game. An example, Dotson last year for TCU, I think he was injured some of the games. He played some. The ones he played in, their offense was just phenomenal. He'd catch 2 or 3 touchdowns a game. The ones he didn't, the offense really, really struggled. And that's just one guy on the outside that's just a receiver. He's drafted. He's going to be in the NFL. He'll probably be a pretty good NFL receiver as well. So I think if you have an impact guy like that on the outside, and you are passing the ball a lot, kind of the new school way, I think they can have an even bigger impact on a game, definitely than the receiver did 10 years ago, but even more so now than a running back could.
Yeah. With the running games, like you said, getting away a little bit from the returning starters, and when you're talking handicapping, for me, even though it's gone to such a oriented passing game, if I have 2 teams that I like, on a given Saturday, and they're both laying 13.5 points, for example, one is a strong passing team, one still runs the football well, I'm going to be more apt to look, it's going to be the reverse of what people would normally think. You would say, I want the passing team, I want to put up a lot of points. The problem is those passing teams do put up a lot of points. A lot of times they score very quickly. Yeah. And whenever they're in the fourth quarter and they got that 20-point lead.
The defense is worn down by that.
Yeah, they've been on the field too long, and they don't know how to protect the lead. They're just scoring. Where if you got a team that runs the football and they have a big lead, where you're saying, well, they got to grind out their scores and they're laying a lot of points. But when they got to the margin and they're covering, at the end of the game, when they're trying to run the clock out, they're doing what they do best, right, and it's protecting the lead or adding to the lead. So that's one of the things that I like. Again, I'm old school, so it takes me a little bit longer to move to the other side of the fence there. But speaking of moving to the other side of the fence, let's go to defense. And you touched upon that you put 3 tiers on the defensive players, which is, a great way to do it. And just like we talked about the offensive line, the defensive line is so important because that's where you're going to get the pressure on the quarterback. Mm-hmm. And I think as the game has changed and they're going to more passing, if you're able to get more pressure on the quarterback, that's going to help protect that third tier, the defensive backs back there, if you can get the pressure on.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's not enough elite quarterbacks in general in college football that can take advantage of a bad secondary. And if they are the week-to-week capping and you have a bad secondary going up a really good quarterback, then obviously you're not going to bet on that team with the bad secondary, even if they have a great defensive line. Right. So you kind of just have to take that into consideration as the week-to-week goes. But, kind of creating a power rating or a forecast for a team preseason before the season starts, definitely I think the defensive line is the most important part of that defensive side. And then probably, I would say the coaching, and if they're defensive minded or what their philosophy is something I really do consider for both sides of the ball. It can't just be like an overall Like, for example, you rate a coach maybe 1 through 5 based on his past experience. Nick Saban would be a 5, and some new kid, say the Bishop Gorman guy that went to UNLV, I don't remember his name, but he'd probably be a 1 or a 2 because he's so brand new. I'd make sure that it's tailored towards offense or defense when you're creating those types of ratings as far as coaching goes. So for me, it's defensive line and defensive coaching, and a lot of times the defensive coordinator comes into play there. And then after that, linebacking core, and then the secondary and defensive backs. I just think there's not enough. If you have a great secondary, obviously that's awesome, like Alabama always does or whatever. But if not, I think it's easier for teams to kind of hide them at a college level than say the NFL, where you have quarterbacks that should all be able to make 30, 40-yard passes and tear you up. So if you're good up front, you can slow down the run, you can put pressure on a quarterback that isn't as good, then you're going to be in a lot of games.
How much importance do you think, with the new style of offense and a lot more running quarterbacks, do you put emphasis on the linebackers as far as being able to contain these guys? Because we'll talk about teams, Nebraska, for example, they always have trouble defensively against mobile quarterbacks. Now we'll see if that starts to change,
Sure.
Second year with the new coach and everything. But certain teams, that becomes a problem because they don't see that many, of them. They still see a lot of the traditional quarterbacks, but when they do go up against them, it presents a problem.
Yeah, and I think, so that kind of goes back to the coaching thing. I think if you have a coach that can game plan accordingly, because like you said, maybe only 2 of your 12 games in a season are against a mobile quarterback. And if your coach just has no clue, it doesn't really matter how good your linebacking group is or even your defensive line, a mobile quarterback is going to just eat you up, running the ball or throwing it over the top, whatever it might be. But I think if you have a coach that knows how to game plan accordingly, then they'll be okay. So I don't really make an adjustment in the linebacking core as much as it kind of makes sense that maybe you should. But that might be something I consider, because it is true. The more and more that I hadn't really considered it before, so I'm thinking out loud now. But the more and more that I'm considering, I guess 3-4 years now, where it's just option quarterback, spread stuff. If you have a lot better linebackers, and say you play in like the Pac-12 or the Big 12, where there are more running quarterbacks or quarterbacks that can throw a lot, linebacker. If you have if you have top recruits or returning guys at linebacker, obviously then that's going to be maybe worth an extra point or something in your power rating that I haven't done to this point, at least.
And the last tip that I'll give as far as returning starters go is dying breed, but they're still out there. Teams like the Navies, the Georgia Techs that still run the option. Those teams, definitely you want to look at the returning starters. The key offensively, obviously, like you said, the quarterback and the offensive line, especially those first 2 weeks, the first couple games on the schedule, because that is a time, more so than anything else, it's timing with them. So if they don't have a quarterback you're breaking in, or you are breaking in a couple people on the offensive line, those teams are going to naturally be a little bit behind schedule with that because of the timing. But secondly, don't forget, teams that face those teams that play them the first week of the season, that's going to be the best opportunity for them to defend the option, because they're going to have their biggest time period to prepare for them. A lot of times we'll pick spots during the year, I know I do, where I'll find good spots where a team's not used to facing a Navy and they only got 1 week to prepare for
Or
them.
in bowl season they get 3 weeks and then it's a better spot to back them.
So definitely.
So to go real quick, Navy, Keenan Reynolds he's been there for 17 years. He's finally gone. And so that's what team that maybe early in the season is worth fading, or at least looking at.
Especially
playing against.
off such a big year last year.
Right, yeah. And Georgia Tech on the flip side returns a lot. They return their quarterbacks, so you probably wouldn't bet against them early.
All right, great stuff as usual, Preston. And guys, don't forget, every weekend, it's the Weekend All Access, $69. Pick your favorite capper. Get all of their plays Thursday through Monday for just $69. We'll be back with more here at WagerTalk.com.